Yeah, all right.
Um, I love this question because I hadn't really thought about this story that wants to be told. So I'm already appreciating the medicine of the question. I've always, actually, I've never identified myself very much with ancestral body lineages because I feel like my connection is more, to plug myself in here, is more with a sort of a cosmos, with light, with blue light, with, things like that would be the truer where am I from answers. And it took me till probably I was in my 40s to feel the privilege of being a spirit in a human body. I was so much more identified with animals and plants and the sky and whatever. And I remember standing on my grandfather's farm after he passed. He and my grandmother were farmers in Illinois. And my aunt bought the farm, and it was like it's the heart of soybean and corn, which are now unfortunately GMO crops. After he passed away, and I went back as a beekeeper, and I hadn't been a beekeeper when they were alive. And I remember standing on the farm, this corn that was like really planted close together, where the ears are raised in a way that you know that there's GMO going on. A dog burst through the corn. It's a hound dog, which has impeccable sense of direction, who was totally lost. He just looked completely distressed and lost, and then he went back into the corn. And I remember realizing that if I had wanted to be a beekeeper, which I'd never imagined myself having that conversation on my grandfather's farm, I couldn't be a beekeeper on that farm because within 5 miles of pollinating distance, there was just simply these GMO crops. And the wild plants had disappeared. Monarchs had disappeared. My cousins had said most of the butterflies and moths had disappeared, which was such a vast change from my childhood because this farm was like alive in me as a child. I had total freedom. So for the first time, I started to have a connection more deeply. I was always very close to my grandparents, but I had a connection with that kind of writ large human ancestral mystical almost connection with my grandparents that just kind of was in the space. It was just imbuing the moment with utter grace, and it kind of grounded me more as a spirit in the human experience at the same time as maybe my own version of crossroads of all these non-human, where I would feel more connected beings and essences were also present. So there's a kind of a moment of divine knit, if you will.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Great question.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. And thanks for starting us. So I think, Libby, you wanted to speak as well. Yeah.
I had two immediate thoughts when you asked that question. One was a number of years ago, I went back to Indiana. I've been several times. My mother was born in a small town called Ladoga, Indiana. And there's a beautiful cemetery there where a lot of my earliest ancestors are buried. And somehow, whenever I visit there, I remember saying to Lynn, when I die, I want to be back. I want to be buried here, back in this beautiful cemetery with all these ancestors. And and then he says, "Well, where would I go?" Anyway, that was kind of a different issue. But so I felt there was just this connection with these early pioneer people who settled in the Midwest, and there was something about the feeling in that small, intimate graveyard that just really tugged at me, and I can't say anything more than that. And the other was a much more, it's a whole different kind of experience where we did holotropic breathing, a technique where you kind of shift your consciousness into another realm just through deep breathing, and I can't explain more than that. And I had an amazing experience doing that. It's without drugs or anything. It's just a breathing technique. And I had a beautiful, beautiful experience of coming together with the whole living system, everything on the planet. It was very moving. And I remember waking up and crying and saying, "Oh my God, we are one, we are one." It was just very powerful and an image that I've never forgotten. I mean, it's just stayed with me. And this was a number of years ago that we had this experience, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. So it's just still in my, I just carry it with me because it was a very strong visualization of what I know in my heart is true. So that's what I would share.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you. Jerry, I think you wanted to speak, right?
I did. Make sure I'm not on mute. Okay, you can hear me. I was still kind of focused on what you said in your initial comments about how much of your connection was in the senses rather than in the mind. And I was particularly struck by the frequency of your referring to listening. And I guess my question is, you did tell stories about your grandmother wanting to slow you down on the kinesthetic plane. You were rushing around. For me, I mean, inner listening is important to me. I've done a lot of work around inner listening with somatic attunement and with music, with piano. But my question is, how do you, I mean, I assume that the listening you're referring to is not just the listening to the trash being picked up in the morning. It's a more subtle, a deeper listening that requires quieting down the superficial noises, whether they're thoughts in our heads or external noises. So my question really is, or my reflection is, how do you experience quieting yourself down to awaken listening at a deeper level?
Okay, and that question could be something that that Two Trees can respond to later.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for that reflection. Again, as a reminder for all of us, the seed question is a time in our lives where we experienced connection with ancestors writ large. Len, I see you're ready to speak.
This is all awakening memories for me also. I identify with what you said about the pivot foot. Of course, we're all watching the basketball finals now, but if you're playing basketball and you move your pivot foot, you lose the ball. It goes over to the other team. You lose your power. So it is surely being connected to who we are. And I was thinking also in that context about Zhao, how you were saying, just searching, like, who am I? To whom do I belong? And what country? What? And so I went, and nearby I got this book that I wrote about the same time, 25 years ago or so, when we did have those holotropic breathing experiences, a mystical experience that connected us. I also spent several years, maybe 2.5 years, a little bit each day, probably of 1,000 days, discovering my story, my ancestors, and what they brought forward and what their history was in the genealogy. And I wrote it in this book of 300 pages and several hundred photos. And on the day before it went to the publisher, I was moved to add what it all meant to me in a paragraph. And it was too late to put it at the front of the book, so it's on the last page. And I'll just read its one long paragraph. From those women and men of great spirit, intelligence, and strength who came before us and said yes to life, may we embody the best of their qualities. In gratitude for their lives lived, let us now continue to build a world based on love and on our inherited wisdom about the oneness of the Creator and of the creation, in all its fabulous diversity of nations, races, religions, species, as sure as the Orkuski and families like them were pioneer people with vision and courage in changing times, so can we follow in the footsteps, living our lives in awe of all that has come before us and in devotion to each other and our precious global living community, knowing who we are.
Beautiful. That book of yours, Len, has been a well-kept secret. I want to take a look at that next time there's an opportunity. Thank you.
It's online. You can just download it freely.
Thank you. Jed.
I'm interested, in thinking about this prompt. This morning, I had a class of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, and this was a Sunday school class. But I had a guest speaker for the class, and it was someone who was a dowser. And one of the things as part of to make this abridged, the curriculum we're doing involves time capsules. And there happens to be one in the church and nobody knows where it is. And so we've used a number of techniques to do this. And even going back through the collective wisdom of the congregation, there's an awful lot of uncertainty. And so I reached out to someone who was an experienced dowser upon learning that nobody in the class knew what dowsing was, and to come and essentially talk about these things. And I was sitting here thinking about my comments relative to this prompt, and then all of a sudden sort of hit me in the face of, hey, wait a minute, in a manner of speaking, that's what we spent the morning doing. In other words, attuning ourselves more broadly in a way that, and I think it juxtaposed to my own mind because I grew up on I too grew up on a farm. I'm like generation number 7 on that farm, but I left the farm to move to Vermont, and I'm sure there's some imbalance that I continue to feel from having, from not being on that farm. So there's some of that ancestral wisdom that I don't have daily interaction with. And I find as I'm thinking about this that there are interesting ways that I work to help my attunement, even though I'm in some ways displaced from where that may be run deepest.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you. Let's see, Zhao and Wendy. Zhao, would you like to speak?
Thank you for everyone sharing. And I think my journey is also trying to going through a lot of crossroads that so I think I experienced a period of worshiping the Western culture and thought Chinese culture, Confucianism is all backwards. And so I come to America, and then eventually my view had changed. I joined a Nature Connecting course, a year-long program, and I thought so. So before I went to China last year for 5 months, I started the permaculture course with Starhawk for 2 weeks, and then the year-long program of Ecology of Awakening, and Joanna Macy's intensive. I immersed myself in all the teachings. So before I went to China, I thought, I could bring this to China. So when I was there, and I happened to meet so many, just by chance, I met people who, there's a revival of Chinese tradition like Confucianism, Taoism, and Chinese Buddhism. And it was a free forum. They open freely to the public, teaching about the family values and respecting nature and also the self-reflection. And I just realized like China already has all the wisdom that deeply rooted 2,000 thousands of years ago, and it was completely blow me away with all the wisdom, and I felt so much more connected to something that there was banned in China during Cultural Revolution, and then after Cultural Revolution, it was all money-oriented capitalism. So I grew up and had no idea to connect whatever the Confucianism, Taoism, and the Chinese Buddhism. So this time when I kept going back, and I could kind of find a way to integrate what I learned here, all the teachings I had, and also connecting with the wisdom in China. So it was very revealing to me for the first time in my life. And one of the teachings in Confucianism is more into the human realm. How do we connect to our ancestors and things? Taoism is respecting nature. I'm just simplifying it. And then Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, kind of reflecting all how there's no self, and how the inner reflection connecting to a much deeper level is kind of 3 layers up. And one of the values is a filial piety, a devotion from the child to the parents and the ancestors. So that was the according to Confucianism, that was the filial piety is the foundation of all virtues. So because it leads to the highest humanness, the virtue of humanness, because once we give our parents and ancestors the unconditional gratitude, that build the foundation to ground us to the roots and also prepare us to go forward. So I think that was my moment of connecting back to my roots. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Xiao. What a deep commentary on the topic of our conversation from Confucianism and Chinese Buddhism. Thank you. Wendy, I guess that leaves you and me, huh?
Yeah, I think for me, the first step is to actually believe that I can connect. And so much of me, or my background, has been naysaying, even though the wanting to believe has been so profound. But there's always that little naysayer, well, now it's not really happening, or you're not really communicating. So the first thing is to be able to open up so that I feel that I can make that connection. And the 2 things that I'm thinking about is my lemon tree in the backyard, and the conversations I've had with it, and the love I've felt from it, and what I give back, and how so much of this is about communicating love, no matter what the being is. And then I think then that energy connects back. And the other thing is, one of my favorite things is there's certain times out of the year in the Jewish tradition where we have a day where we connect with our ancestors, and we light a 24-hour candle, and we remember the particular ancestor. And I just love going to sleep at night and with the candle burning, and with that wonderful glow in the dark, and imagining that maybe I'm getting some kind of communication from that ancestor with that glow of the candle. So those are my 2 shares.
Thank you, Wendy. Has everybody else gone except for me? Yeah, I think so. So let's see, I just want to reset this for myself. Well, thank you for reflecting that question back to us, 2 Trees. I was thinking about what you said about, in answer to my question about what would you say to your grandmother. You say you learn from her what was appropriate in her environment, and then you have to ask the beings in your environment what's appropriate now. The teacher for some of us, for Wendy and for me and for Jerry as well, is Reb Zalman. He's a He's a rabbi who also created Jewish Renewal. And his main teaching was, if we want to follow the path of our ancestors, we have to first really connect with what it was they were doing and what kinds of transformations resulted from their practices. And then we have to learn how to do that today. It's not imitating what they did. It's finding the practices in today's world, in today's culture, and today's technologies that will enable similar transformations. But what I wanted to share, to Therese, is my answer to your question, something I shared a little bit about with you earlier, which was going to the larger ancestors, redwood trees. I spend a month every year traveling a little bit to visit my daughter who lives up in Portland. And on the way, I spend a lot of time just by myself in a tent in redwood forests. And I've learned about the redwood forests. I've learned about how, the greed of the people who were coming to California in the 1800s wound up in devastating 95% of these forests, destroying these ancient beings so they could make some quick money. But there are 5% that are left, and they're being replanted. So I was sitting in a grove of redwood trees, having been out there by myself for a few days, and I was just feeling this sense of mourning. And what happened, totally unexpected, is I experienced the redwood trees speaking to me. Here are these ancient beings, 500, 700, 800, 1,000 years old, speaking to me. And they weren't speaking English, but they were speaking redwood tree. And as I just opened up to receive what they were saying, the message was, we've been here a long time. And we've seen a lot of things that you can't even imagine. And there's a lot more to come that you have no insight into or no knowledge about. But what you can do is you can be here with us right now. And we can share this moment together. And then you can see where you want to go from here. That's what the redwood trees said to me. I left with a real sense that during the remaining years of my life, I want to be involved in protecting redwood forests. And it's taken me a little while to sort of mobilize to act on that. But I know that that's still a task that's remaining for me to act on. That's my ancestor experience.